If you're ready to get this show on the road, brother JT.
I'm ready to get it on the road, in space, in another dimension. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome back to your Bedroom Super Producer podcast. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
And I'm BK.
And as you know, we always set out to inspire you, give you guys some info on stuff that might just take your career to the next level. And today, we have a very, very special episode for you guys, as we will cover in this part 1 of 2 a pioneer, a groundbreaker, someone who everybody knows the name, knows the legacy, but today we will go over this man's illustrious career and how he literally changed the face of modern music. Is that a good intro, BK?
That's a great intro for, I could say, the father of synthesis, of the original keyboards, those bloopy sounds that we all have come to love. And I think that if it wasn't for Robert Moog, none of the instruments that we have today would be the same. None of the architecture of all the instruments and the synths, the modular stuff that we have, even the computer stuff, I've been very influenced, as we see in all the replicas that have been done of his instruments over the years. So yes, this week, groundbreaking coverage, the Moog instruments.
We have a lot of things to say about R.A. Moog, and we decided to separate this into 2 different eras because there's so much to talk about. And in this first installment of the Moog series, we're going to go over more of the beginnings of Moog as an engineer and as a synthesizer creator. And so, BK, why don't you start this one out with where, when this whole thing started?
Well, this whole thing started first when Robert Moog came to be, born in 1934, way back then, before World War II, and slowly but surely was always interested into all these different instruments and TVs and amplifiers and different electronic things. Managed to get his degree, actually 2 degrees, from I think 1 degree in physics from Queens and another degree in electrical engineering from Columbia University. So we already see his technical inclinations right there. And the first thing that he started with was building those theremin instruments that we all know about. That's a Star Trek intro music that everyone knows was actually written on a theremin. And that's what he did in the first year. So I think from 1954 all the way to the 1960, 62, 63, he built a pretty good business selling a lot of theremin kits. Also, I think he also started with amplifiers. So that was his first foot into building all these instruments. 1964 starts the Moog business, and then we have these wonderful creation that starting with modular synthesizers that became super popular, all the way to when it became kind of a commercial success in 1968 with the recreation of some Sebastian Bach songs on the modular, and then all the way to the iconic Minimoog Model D. So that's what we're going to cover today.
And I think actually, maybe my research isn't correct, but I think he even got a PhD from Cornell University in engineering physics. right around 1968. And that's when he actually stopped the whole theremin business with his dad. I think he built that first business with his dad to pay for like his tuition and stuff like that. So one could say that he always had that entrepreneurial head on his shoulders. He always tried to use his engineering skills to grab a little bit of that bag, if you will.
The fact that he built all those kits shows that he had an interest, not necessarily towards musical instrument at first, but like you said, a little bit of an entrepreneur slash crazy inventor.
He actually started to really think about building music instruments right around 68 also, when he met this experimental musician. His name is Deutsch, Herbert, or I can't remember his first name.
You can't remember the name of his super partner, Herb Deutsch.
Yeah, Herbert, that's it, Herbert Deutsch. And the guy was like, I need unheard sounds, not any of those sounds that you can come up with in the studio with, extensive processing. I want something that right out of the box will create those unheard sounds. And so Robert Moog went on to build his first modular.
Modular is a big word, but the first modules.
The first modules, right. And I think that's one of the first thing that separates Moog from all of the other synthesizer makers is his modular approach. Building modules like that would work standalone, as well as, encasing those into big wooden boxes and calling them modular synthesizers.
First, what we have to say is that those type of modules didn't exist for musicians, for like audio applications. His approach was kind of a more science-based approach. And the way back then, if you think about those pioneers, the pioneers of musique concrète, and the people who would be making these huge pieces and who would be cutting tape and like mixing sounds that would sound like alien invasions and everything. They would do it it would take really a long time, and the sounds that they were looking for didn't really exist. And his approach was more of making things that it kind of looked like at the beginning as like kind of like testing equipment. So basically that's where the modular came from. Like each module had a specific function, kind of like a test equipment. Let's say you want to test the frequency of something, well, you have a box for that. You want to create some sort of a waveform, well, you have a box for that. So I think that's how he kind of envisioned things. And the way he started, I think it was one of his strengths. He would always listen to artists. He would always listen to how they wanted to play, what kind of interface they wanted, what type of sound maybe they wanted, what type of knobs they wanted to play around with. And I think that's what made the Moog brand so strong, because it was very musical, right? So I think that's how it got started with Herb Deutsch, one of his earliest partners, that he made. I think it was something super simple. It was, I think, 2 oscillators and 2 voltage controlled amplifiers, 2 VCAs, with I think something like a doorbell ring just to activate them. The sounds that he managed to synthesize from that and to create really blew his partner away. And that's how they started that customized modular design business.
Let me go over some of the things you said, because you've mentioned some key things here. The first of which being that when Robert Moog was approached by Deutsch to create synthesizers, the only things that existed to create sounds were, like you said, just like equipment that was used in radios and professional engineering environments. And so there weren't any things made for the public yet. Another thing that you said that to me really represents what Moog did in terms of engineering musical instruments is the fact that he made them sound and be usable in a musical way. And I think that's very, very key and sometimes overlooked now. But back in the day, you had those big boxes that could create sounds, like oscillators and stuff like that. But we take for granted now that back in those days, there were no musical keyboards attached to those boxes yet, right?
Exactly. And even people like the Bucklas and from the West Coast who were making like synthesizers pretty much at the same time as Robert Moog, they wanted to get away from that keyboard bass and that classical sound. They wanted the sound to be more ethereal, a little bit more like in the clouds and like stuff that was totally different. But Robert Moog understood, even from a business sense, that he had to create that connection with the client, that connection with the musicians, and it was already pretty alien what he was making. Like back in the days, the filter cutoff or envelope, that was totally foreign for everyone. So he needed to create that connection, and those keys were kind of the way to create that connection or that familiarity with a brand new instrument.
Yeah, and to keep going in that line, I think that most of Moog's innovations came from a desire to give musicians some of the things that they already had, let's say, on a guitar. So that's where I guess like the pitch wheel, for example, came about. To bend those notes, go up and down, and that's one of those inventions that Moog actually didn't trademark or patent, I think, when creating his first instruments, right?
Well, actually, he didn't trademark anything aside from the filter, the ladder filter, which he had a patent for it. And in a way, I think it's you may say that it wasn't business savvy of him to not have patented all those things, but in a way, the fact that it stayed open, it created that sonic revolution that we're now like we're like ripping the fruits of today. I think there wouldn't have been the ARP 2600 and all those, the Fairchilds and all those things. We wouldn't have seen all those things if he had patented everything and like prevented people from using his invention or the way he saw how circuits should work together.
And again, let's go back to some of the milestones of the first era of the business. We have to remind our audience, especially the younger people out there, that in the mid to late 60s, musicians had no idea how to use these things. And so there was a big educational process that had to go on for people to start liking the sounds and then figuring out how they could introduce these sounds in their own music, right?
Well, exactly, because if you think about it, the first product, if we don't count the theremin and the amplifier that he did at the beginning, the first big thing that he did was the Modular series. So the Modular series were based on the 900 series modules. They started making probably around 1960, 66, 67. And pretty much like 2 or 3 series, like the Model 15, the Model 35, and the Model 55. The Model 55 is like the huge one. That's like the biggest.
Is that the one that like Keith Emerson has on stage?
Exactly. Well, actually, the one that Keith has, I think it's a 55. But I think it's modified and there's extra stuff on it. Those are like the basic configuration that he gave with those 3. But I think that back in those days, he pretty much built customized stuff for everyone. So there were a ton of 900 modules. I think there were like 20 or 30 different types, from oscillators to filters to ring modulators and whatnot, mixers and everything. And he pretty much put them together as a custom base, like for what the artist wanted. And what you have to understand with modular is that when you get it, nothing comes out of it. Like there's no presets, nothing is patched, there's no internal summing, like internal patching. Like if you take an ARP 2600, you're still gonna have a sound when you play it for the first time, even if you haven't patched anything, because it's pre-patched in the back. If you're not connecting like a certain oscillator to the filter, it's already pre-connected. It's if you want to bypass it, or if you want to do like a different routing, then you patch it in. On the Moog, it's totally different. Nothing is connected together. So think about it. Pre-internet, there was no patching workbook. There was pretty much nothing. So you had to go to seminars. You had to call someone who had one, get a basic schematic. What do I connect first together? So it wasn't like a guitar that you just plug in an amp, or even if you don't plug it, then you already have sounds. So that made it a little bit difficult to approach in the beginnings. So even if it gave you total flexibility, the fact that at the beginning it was very, very difficult to introduce yourself to it, that's what kind of made it kind of a niche product.
I think that sums up really well what actually happened in those late 60s, early 70s days for the Moog company. And even though Moog is probably one of the biggest names in electronic music, as soon as 1970, the company actually went bankrupt because companies like ARP actually catered better to a wider public with, like you said, instruments that were already pre-connected, quote unquote, and that you could actually play right out of the box. Whereas the modulars were really, well, first of all, very, very, very expensive. I think those modular systems went for like 10K in 1968. So just imagine how much that would be in 2020, right?
In 2020, it would be something like it's as if you were like paying something like $35,000 or $40,000 today for an instrument. So that's a car. It's two cars.
So I guess that's what made R.A. Moog, the first installment of the company, go bankrupt. And that's when they got bought by this guy who owned Musonics, I think.
Yeah, that's when it became basically it became Moog Music. It was a guy called White Tana, I think, and basically I think Moog got kind of caught in, like you said, since Robert Moog didn't patent any of his inventions or anything like that, other people started coming in the market. Actually, he was kind of victim of his own success, because in 1968, Wendy Carlos, a famous composer of electronic music and film scores, did this super album called Switched on Bach, which utilized the Moog, which everyone was like into, and it sold, I think to this day, I think it sold something like 1 million copies or something, which is pretty incredible for like something made with it, like a new type of instrument. After that moment in 1968, every studio and every producer wanted to have their own modular and possibly recreate that hit and possibly recreate those sounds and everything. And at first it worked super well. 1968, 69, they had plenty of orders and everything. But then when people didn't make that that hit album, and people didn't really understand how to necessarily use it, and it wasn't necessarily the most reliable thing, and it was at first pretty difficult to get sounds, and you know how it is, like you want stuff to be made fast, and in this business of ours, we want everything to be made yesterday. So he was kind of a victim of his own success. There was a recession going on in the late 70s. ARP came out with their 2600 that was less expensive. Less interest in the modular, and I think he had built inventory for parts for, I think, $250,000 of something, and then because the recession and everything, orders starting to be canceled, and he had all those parts. So basically, he didn't have as many sales as he wanted, and he owed his suppliers $250,000. So that's why he accepted the offer from the guy from Musonic to become Moog Music. And basically, the guy from Musonic just said, I'll pay off your suppliers, and I have to have a percentage of the company. And that's the first takeover in 1970, 71 of Moog. So yes, he had that entrepreneur mindset, but I think when he was creating his creations and inventing his stuff, maybe he wasn't necessarily the most business savvy. He could have maybe done things a little bit differently, but at the same time, that wasn't really his job. His job was to invent stuff and to design stuff, and it is what it is.
Well, I think it speaks to his vision because, and even today, I think that the employees of the new Moog Music Company will tell you that Robert Moog never compromised on quality and never compromised on his designs to make it easier to put to market, a new instrument, for example. And just before we wrap up this first period, right before the first merger or selling of the company, I just want to read you a little quote, because we talked about Robert Moog, the innovator, and Robert Moog, the person who put on the market a bunch of different things. And I think this little quote right here really reflects on everything that he did prior to inventing maybe one of the most famous and most important synthesizers of all time. And so it goes like this. Moog created fundamental synthesizer concepts and things, that's my own take, but things that are taken for granted nowadays, such as the pitch wheel, modularity, envelope generation, and voltage control. So when you read VCO on one of your Arturia synths, this is the actual thing that Robert Moog created. Can you enlighten us, before I finish the quote, BK, on what a VCO is?
VCO is a voltage-controlled oscillator, and it's pretty much the basis of all subtractive synthesis. Your sound starts at the VCO. So you create your waveform at the VCO, and then you shape it with the envelopes, with the filters, before going out with the voltage-controlled amplifiers to your amp or computer nowadays. But it's the basis of the synthesizing a sound. You start with VCOs. The Model D has 3. The Voyager also has 3. And usually it takes at least, I think, 2 to combine the sound to have a certain richness. And with 2, you can also use one of them to modulate the other. So it's the basis of synthesis.
So if you don't have voltage control, one might just say that there's no analog synthesizers.
Well, if you don't have voltage control, you don't have the key range. Your notes are not going to change if you go higher in the registry, so you need voltage control. That's how you tell the oscillator, tells him which note to play. So
Gotcha.
So that's why you want voltage to control it.
So the quote goes on, and it states, he is credited for helping bring synthesizers to a wider audience and influencing the development of popular music. His only patent was on his filter design, as you've said. Commentators have speculated that he would have become extremely wealthy had he patented his other innovations, but that their availability in the public domain helped the synthesizer industry flourish, as you've also mentioned. So I think that's a great testament to just how much he brought to us during his lifetime. And I thought that was brilliant of him to be that generous. I mean, the guy just wanted to improve music, and that's I don't know. I mean, that's such a grand gesture for all of us geeks out there who basically we base our life on his inventions. And to create a little segue for our next period of time covering Robert Moog's career, I've got Hans Zimmer here saying, I had to choose between a Minimoog or a car. I chose the Moog, and I still don't drive today. And so now we are in 1971. Musonics has acquired the name and the business of Moog Music. It actually went for a while. It was named Moog Musonics, I think. I think there are even some Minimoogs that actually have the Musonics brand on them. But yeah, so 71 saw the birth and the invention of, would you say, the most famous and infamous synthesizer of all times?
I think it was 1970. I think it was like a little bit before the company was bought.
Okay.
So it was a little bit before. So even as this new instrument arrived, I think people didn't quite understand it at the beginning. Music stores didn't want to like buy some and have some on their shelves. And even though it was an iconic instrument, I think at the beginning the sales weren't that awesome, and that's why he was forced to sell the company, even though he had we could say the greatest analog synth almost of all time that influenced the creation of all the other ones that followed.
And something that I learned researching this episode is why the Minimoog's full name is actually the Minimoog Model D. And for those that don't know out there were Model A's, B's, and C's prior to the Model D.
Yeah, of course, because it was basically the Model D is the final iteration. Basically, because there was the first one, the Model A, was pretty much like a keyboard with different modulars, like just the oscillator banks, the mixer, the different modifiers, and the VCA. I think the B model put everything on the same panel, on the same like sheet metal panel, and like there were no different modules. Everything was on the same panel. All the circuits were like in the back of the panel. Model C introduced the mod wheel and the pitch wheel. Also, I think Model B also introduced the fact that the face could be moved up and down. And the Model D is the production model. So you see how like you see the scientific background of Robert Moog when you see that there's iteration of the product, and then he finally arrived at something that was, okay, this is what we're going to manufacture. And I think he talked to artists, and the way the knobs are arranged, I think, is thought in this way. The way the keyboard is arranged, the mod wheel and everything. I think it was made not for a science teacher to play a keyboard, but it was made for a musician to be taken to another level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially the retractable panel allowed musicians to take the synthesizer on the road much easier.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you could also tell that with those single faceplates, metal faceplates, Moog had this ambition of kind of teaching users how to route the sounds through the whole machine, right? Mm-hmm. The way he lays out, the oscillators on the left, and then as you move to the right, you understand that there's the filter, and then the envelope generator, and then the envelope amplifier. Are they the same? The two envelopes, basically.
Yeah. Two envelopes, one for the filter and one for the amplifier, basically, right?
Yeah.
I think it's what's fun about the Model D is that you see, like what I talked earlier, how the modular was, it was difficult to access, it was expensive, no sound would come out of it when you first got it. You spend $40,000 on it and you get home and nothing comes out of it. It's got to be frustrating, or you forget that you needed patch cords and you don't have any, so you have to go get some. But and the Minimoog was like the total opposite of it. It was stage ready. You know, the keyboard was incorporated. You had the mod wheels. You turn it on and it already makes a sound. And then, like you said, you have this kind of have like this arrow on the say on the panel. It tells you, okay, this goes here, this goes after this influences this, and you can morph your sound and mold your sound and sound design exactly what you want, like right away. It's in front of you. So that's why I say that I think the fact that he consulted musicians for it makes it all even more attractive, and still a prevalent design to this day. Like they reissued the Model D a couple of years ago and they sold out.
Absolutely. And I think that even if you look at VSTs, a lot of the thinking behind the way the front plate of the Minimoog Model D was, the way it was designed, still influences designers to this day, even if in the digital realm, which is astonishing when you think about it, because it's been 50 years. And another historical thing happened with the Model D when they put it out. I read somewhere that there was a mistake made on the filter and that they kept it that way. Did you know about that?
Not quite. Maybe if you tell the story, maybe I'll recall something.
So this engineer, I can't remember his name, but he realized like the night before the Model Ds were going into production that the filter was overdriven by like 10 to 12 dBs. And that was a that was a mistake, but they had to go into production. They couldn't afford to go back to how I have no idea, but how to fix that overdrive issue. But then they realized that that's what the people loved most about their Model Ds is the juicy filter. And that's because it is pushed too hard.
Exactly.
And they always kept that design afterwards on all Moog products, as far as I know.
Yeah, exactly. Like you realize that when you push it, even on like Mooger Fooger's pedals to this day, the way it reacts is always a function of how hard you drive it. And if you want it to have that juiciness, like even if you make your signal that goes in, you clip it a little bit, it has that analog je ne sais quoi. And so yeah, I didn't know it was a mistake, but I knew it was a staple sound that a lot of people have wanted to recreate. And when you start out on a Moog filter, you're usually pretty disappointed when you twist the knob of a filter of another synth.
But I mean, once again, it's one of those things with Moog that to this day people will say, "Oh, I love this synthesizer. I love that synthesizer," but there's just something about the Moog filter, and quite honestly, I've never heard of any other filter that is as revered as the Moog filter. And so I thought that was quite interesting. By the way, the name of the engineer that was working at the Moog back then was Bill Hempstead. If you guys want to look it up, he's the guy who actually let it go and let this filter become history.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah. And so let's go back to the timeline. As we said, Musonics bought the company, but Moog did not leave the company as they were acquired. He stayed up until 1977, and I think that starting from 72, they started to like repackage some of the Musonics synthesizers. The Sonic 5 became the Sonic 6, and that's quite a historical design in and of itself, right?
When Moog became Moog Music, I think that was from 71 to 74. So they created a lot of pretty cool synth. I think the Satellite in 72, the Sonic 6, that suitcase synthesizer.
Yeah, with the blue and like orange hue, which was really, really
exactly
iconic in my book.
And then even all the way to the first Taurus pedals, well, the Taurus bass, the initial Taurus, the big Moog on the floor that Yes used, Rush used, that Dream Theater used. All the meanwhile in '73, once again, financial issues. They were once again bought by another company called Norlin in '73. So Moog wasn't too lucky in the business part. I think they probably would have needed stronger, someone with the stronger business sense. They had the development part, they had it, design, development, marketing part, they had it. On the sales side, they had it also. But I think on the finance side, and at the same time, it was such a competitive business. And it was the 70s to like 1970 to 1980 and 82. Like I say, Moog was pretty much, he was a victim of his own success, because then you got the ARP that came on the scene, the Dave Smith, the sequential, the Yamahas that came on the scene, the Korgs, the Rolands. So the market became inundated with different things. And at some point when they were in trouble, you had iconic synth that also started to come out. The Junos, the Jupiters, the microcontroller era started to come in. So not a very easy time to stay true to your roots and to build organic instruments with components that always fit together, that don't always take into account the market. And it's difficult to invent something that's life-changing, but at the same time you want to make money and you want to tailor to the public's need. And at the same time, people don't want to pay $5,000 for something. They want something a little bit cheaper. The Japanese found a way to do it cheaper and still be like very innovative. So lots of troubles in terms of finances, but still they managed to create pretty iconic instruments.
The Norlin Association brought to us some of the most sought after and again iconic sounding synths.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Prodigy, the Rogue.
Yeah, the Polymoog in 1976.
Polymoog, yeah. The Taurus 2.
Yeah, Micromoog. Prodigy, like you said, the Liberation. Let's not forget the Liberation.
Absolutely. And so that went on until like 81, before I think they were reacquired again.
No, I think they kind of switched it up. It wasn't going too well. They even made the famous the blue and orange one. I don't know if you remember that one, the Source, the first microprocessor one. It looked kind of like a DX7. You look at it like it's a Moog. You're like, what? There's no knobs on it. There's no filter. There's nothing on it. You're like, okay, how does that sound?
Really retro looking.
They kept on going. I think the last big product that they managed to put out, because like as we said earlier, Bob Moog left in 1977, and Moog kept on making instruments. So people sometimes ask, well, how could they do that if he wasn't there anymore? Well, pretty much his whole team was still working there. The designers that he had trained were still there. The marketing guys were still there. So his essence was pretty much still there, and they were still using his designs and his ideas just to show how he influenced and he inspired people even after he was gone from the place. So the last like quintessential instrument that they built was probably the Memory Moog in 1982. and then from that point, I think it went downhill. I think at some point they didn't even make that many instruments anymore. I think they started even making like AC parts and industrial electronic stuff and everything, until they went bankrupt in, I think, 1986, 86, 87, something like that.
Yeah, 87 they were bought again by this holding group. I don't ELE or EGE EJE, sorry. But yeah, that's just sad, to see that in the mid 80s, while the Japanese were thriving, especially with the birth of digital synthesizers and all of that, they started to work in other industries just to pay the bills.
Yeah, but it showed that the industry was going so fast, and innovation was coming from all sides, from the digital side, from the MIDI protocol came out, all those incredible synth, the Fairchild, the Prophet, like Oberheims, and all those synth came out at the same time. How incredibly complicated it was to stay relevant and to keep a business afloat in those times. That's the say. Imagine today if we had all these great synth like that, and you had a Juno, or I don't know, a Jupiter 8 for $3,000, but the Moog was $7,000. Well, you're probably gonna go for the Jupiter. So it was a pretty difficult time to have a music company and to stay relevant with all this innovation going on.
And I think that's also a testament to the way we think of business today. You log on to YouTube or Facebook and you'll see those marketing gurus tell you that they became a multi-million dollar, they built multi-million dollar companies in over 3 weeks. And then you look at a guy like Moog, who has an incredible legacy, but for 20 years, he was, killing himself to make ends meet, and he also invented a whole industry just from his designs. So there's kind of a clash, when I look at how pioneers like him struggle to stay in business. And nowadays we make young people think that it's just about, flipping the switch on this or that strategy with advertising or whatever. It's just not the way you change the world, is what I'm trying to say,
Well, it's also very different today. Like you said, all those companies today, they usually build upon, you usually have a platform that's established for you to be able to make your business happen.
And then you couldn't really steal either a Moog Modular or a Minimoog, whereas today you can certainly pirate, a Minimoog from Arturia and get going with your music production. And I think what I'm trying to say is we especially electronic musicians of the new era take for granted everything that people like Robert Moog invented. And I think that sometimes we should reflect on those pioneers and what they brought before firing up all these thousands of plugins that we have, because it actually started from someone who plugged together little electrical boards and knobs and put that into wooden boxes, and like we really have it good. You know what I mean? Like today it's just so simple.
Today is like it's the land of opportunity. Like so many people have contributed to music and to instruments and to virtual plugins and to computers and DAWs and everything, that it's really incredible today that you could, just the fact that you can go on YouTube and listen to someone who already has a Sub 37 or a Mother 32 or something, just to see if you like the sound or if it's something that you would want to play with. It's incredible.
And I think that there is a very big story to tell about this analog revival. And I'm not just talking about, the new analog synthesizers that are coming out, but everything that computer-based musicians produce nowadays is trying to mimic analog circuitry and analog, filters and envelope generators. And 50 years down the line, we're still trying to emulate with code what these beautiful machines did. And we'll cover what happened since then with the revival of also the Moog Music Company.
Exactly. So next time, all the good stuff, and Bob Moog will make an incredible comeback, and we'll start talking about the new inventions that brought him back on the Moog forefront. And just to give a little teaser to everyone, we're going to be talking about the Mooger Foger pedals, how he got to be able to reuse the Moog Music name, and also the second most iconic instrument, the Moog Voyager.
Oh, I still remember that one day we played one. It had just come out, 2002, 2003. We were in the music shop together, and by accident, one of us touched on one of those white keys, and we almost made the whole shop explode with that bass sound.
Yeah, it was, we made big bass vibrations in the whole store.
I think that's the day we both figured we needed some analog goodness in our studios too.
Yeah. That resonance was pretty awesome.
So yes, stay with us up until next week as we make you discover the revival, the very spectacular Act 2 in the Moog saga.
Yeah. So on this, we're going to wish everyone a great week. Keep making that awesome music. Make that music growl with bass.
Peace out.
Peace out, guys. Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe if you like what you hear. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Also, if you want to support us, head on to delicatebeats.com. You can find our serum packs, our contact instruments, and also plenty of freebies if you subscribe to the newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and once again, keep making that awesome music.